Good morning, everyone. This is the GitLab retrospective. Today is September 7th, 2021. My name is Christopher Leffoltz. I am sitting in for Kenny Johnston to MC today. Kenny had a last-minute conflict come up, so I'm covering for him. Well, as always, we'll start with previous retrospective improvement tasks. I had the first one on the list, which was looking at maintainer availability to see how we could do it. We haven't made much progress on this in the past month. We've been challenged with other items, so this hasn't been as high priority, so we haven't made as much progress. Donald, are you on the line to talk about item number 4?
Yep. Thanks, Christopher. This was around the prioritization of P1s and S1s. A few milestones ago, there was some confusion on what an engineer should do when there is a P1 S1 that comes through. We changed the handbook, or we updated the process within the handbook for the plan page. And then we were just keeping an eye on P1s and S1s that went through to see if that did in fact clarify the process. And if it did, we were going to update the handbook at a more global level. We haven't heard anything around confusion since we've merged that. So assuming that the process is clear now. However, there are a couple things within the global handbook page. Currently, there's one that I linked to within the product development workflow that kind of covers a lot of what we have in our plan stage handbook. And then there's also an ongoing conversation, a new conversation around localized feature change locks that may alter the process a little bit. So taking both of those into account, I'm not going to make another change to the global handbook page, and we'll just kind of keep an eye on those things. Tanya, you're next.
Cool. I'm looking right now. So the next two items, we didn't get updates in time. Looks like Tanya's not on, so I'll have to check with her as well as Sean. So I'll work on getting those in. Kenny had the next item, which was we'll check into the handbook about providing scoping for technical investigations and creating an issue template. Basically, there was a tracking issue associated with this, and it looks like it's complete. We've improved the issue template for technical investigations to focus on scoping. Note this highlighted to me that we use Spike technical evaluation and technical investigation to mean the same thing. I create an issue to propose to consolidate the one term as Spike. So looks like he's made some good progress there on that. And that's it for action items. The next discussion topic is, or the next section is our discussion topics. And the first one is from Arturo. Arturo, are you on the call? Doesn't look like he is.
Actually, he isn't. He said Kenny was going to speak to this.
Yes, so I'll speak to it. So basically, the Zento integration was a community contribution. It duplicates a lot of code from JIRA issue views, and it's an interesting trade-off. Should we accept this contribution by adding technical debt or push for the highest quality? So this is kind of the classic question we always ask. And what Kenny asked to kind of help prod the discussion is how have other groups approached community contributions that may add technical debt? And Jerome, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I added a comment here. I think there's a few things to consider specifically with this MR that went through or that's in the process of being reviewed. I think the first thing is Jihu is a new team that is starting to contribute over to the GitLab code base. And similar to all of our existing engineers that learn how to contribute to the GitLab code base, I think they're learning as well. So the first thing is just ensuring that iterations are small. The Zentao integration, we'd need to be able to scope that to at least just have the minimal functionality rather than adding all of the bells and whistles. I've added just an image that I think we all constantly refer back to about building a skateboard first before building a motorcycle or a car. So making sure that you can get from A to B first before adding horsepower, air conditioning, and seats. The second thing that I'd mention is we need to ensure that MRs are small enough to review. So the current MR is about 3,000 lines, which is very large. The reviewer has suggested breaking this down into several smaller MRs with the use of feature flags to be able to push that MR through. And then the third thing is, I think maintainers and reviewers should continue to uphold code review guidelines. One of them that isn't mentioned in our code review guidelines, but is one of the core principles of Rails is don't repeat yourself. So keeping your code dry. So if this MR has a lot of duplicate code, that wouldn't be dry. So those are just some initial thoughts. I'll share this with the Jihu team as well, just so that they're aware of this. Darva, it looks like you have some thoughts as well.
Just one line. I don't think we should reduce our quality standards for community contributions. I think in general, we hold them, for the most part, to the standards that our development team is held up to. And I'm sure we've all heard the most recent quality messaging that's gone out. It's these types of things that seem like, it's okay, we can probably get away with it. Anytime you're questioning and you're saying, oh, we can probably get away with it, let's not get away with it. Those are just my thoughts.
The other thing I would just add is we have the principal quality is everyone's responsibility. So I think I do want to give some praise to the reviewer who encouraged breaking this down along with our values for the sake of quality as well.
So one aspect that I see is we could have a community contribution that gets halfway there, and effectively we need to finish the community contribution to get it up to our standards. One thing that I would encourage folks to do in that situation is to get their manager and as well as product involved, because I think it's critical to make sure that we understand kind of the impact of that. Because I think outside community contributions can oftentimes be a good start, but I don't know if we can necessarily guarantee that a community contribution is going to get to our standards in these situations.
I will say, Christopher, currently because of the priorities on the teams, there probably isn't the capacity to finish it up right now. So I'm not sure what you say to the reviewer when you don't have capacity and you won't for a while. To the contributor when you won't have capacity for a while.
Yeah, that's why I think we need to engage product in it, is kind of for that discussion, right? Because I think that's where messaging is kind of key to that, and making sure we have a good aspect. We can ask the community contribution person to potentially, give them some suggestions on things to approach the problem. The challenges is when it maybe is they don't have the technical ability or don't have the resources potentially to do as much verification as we have. Another way to say it is a polite way to say no.
I do wish that we could have had some coaching before they wrote the 3,000 lines. On iteration.
Jerome, I'm happy to provide that feedback too, to Shen, as we're both kind of involved there.
That sounds good. We can discuss it on tonight's call with them.
Cool. If there's no additional feedback, we'll move on to the second discussion topic. This is from Michelle. Michelle, you want to verbalize your question?
Yeah, this is a proposal that we are thinking on the team to bring back to our milestone review, the community MRs. We have some stale MRs because we decide to focus on other stuff. There was a small opportunity to work on them on this last milestone, but at the end we didn't do it. So one of the opportunities will be like having them back on the milestone review, not as a priorities for the ones, but at least having them to mark that we are trying to work on them. And I see that the question is how other teams are integrating their community MRs on their teams.
Cool. So what are folks' thoughts as far as how they integrate their community MRs reviews into their workflows? Where do they typically see them come in? Do they just let community contributions come in at any time, or do they kind of consciously think about it? And don't jump all in at once. Surely there's at least one manager in this discussion who can say where they put it in their review process, or if at all.
I've typically worked in areas with fewer community contributions, so product intelligence, growth, fulfillment. Less people are contributing to those areas, but during the odd time we do get community contributions, they're sort of managed in a little bit of an ad hoc manner. So someone has put together an MR, we'll just ping an available engineer to try to lend a hand. So I'd say it's sort of handling as it comes. But if you're working in an area where there's a lot more community contributions, that's probably something that needs to be worked into milestone planning or capacity planned for.
I would also agree with Jerome that typically as they come in, they're usually pretty small. So team members, the biggest thing is finding them. Maybe sometimes product gives them to us because it might not have the right labels on it. But they do them ad hoc, except for the one we were just talking about as an exception. If it's significant, like Jihu, and that requires a lot of effort, we would have to try to figure out where we could prioritize it. But that's very unusual.
In this case, package was already doing it before. I just joined the team and I know that we are not doing it anymore. So what we are planning to do is adding them again during the planning for the milestone.
Yeah, I can speak to the plan ones a little bit. Like we have a small number of like really active community contributors, like a handful that we can, like I've done calls with them. We can see their activities on issues. So we have a fairly good idea of like what they intend to do, but it's still like way too ad hoc for my comfort, to be honest. We can't, like, if we say we've deprioritized a feature, but we have a very active community contributor on that feature, we still have to put considerable capacity around reviewing those MRs.
So that's one thing I've actually been wrestling with, John, is how do we make sure we understand the cost of keeping a piece of functionality or feature that's been deprioritized, particularly around more around the operational costs associated with it, but I think community costs should also be considered as well in those situations. So I think we have to basically start thinking in terms of what those expenses are, and trying to figure out how we can quantify that, because like that's where we can go back for product investment and make clear that kind of these are the trade-offs, and that might cause us to make some hard decisions. But actually, those are sometimes the hard decisions are the best decisions for us to make as an organization, because it'll make sure that we're focused on the right things and also taking into consideration that. Whereas right now, I think we do the, I'm not sure what the right term is that articulates this, but the term I would use is sweep it under the rug. It's still there, but it's hidden from view. So it's much harder to kind of for people to recognize that challenge.
Yeah, and actually, I've been thinking about that as well, and it just became very noticeable, sort of in the last maybe month or two, that we're like giving significant capacity to service desk, not just on the engineering side, actually, but also from Gabe and the product managers as well. Like they have to keep in touch and kind of, these contributors have a very like well-defined view of where they want to take Service Desk, and that has to align with our plans for refactor and other parts of the application and so on. So it's kind of like we can't ignore it anymore. We're very grateful for it, but we can't ignore that it is like we're assigning capacity to something that we have said we deprioritize.
I added a comment here that says, I tie this back to what Christopher mentioned above when we were discussing the previous discussion topic about looping product in. So if it's a larger or a lower quality MR, it's probably going to take more engineering resources to get it up to par. So that's something that's going to take capacity, which needs to be planned for. John, what you mentioned was possibly getting a contribution that might have a different vision in mind than what the PM has. So I'd say that's probably a separate story. And the PM obviously needs to agree with whatever that contribution is.
And then I just added a point that is probably not communicated too broadly. So this may be the first some people are hearing about this, but there's a new team in quality called Open Source Outreach. It can be the DRI to help with these sort of things. Traditionally, it's just like identifying community contributions has fallen to engineering productivity, and it's one of many responsibilities that doesn't get the attention it needs. With this new team, they can help streamline the process, but also try to make it clear where we're looking for community contributions so that there's less of this conflict for new contributors in particular.
Cool. Any other additional thoughts on that topic? All right. We'll go into the improvements for the next release to track. We didn't have many that came out of this discussion. John Hope, your idea about quantifying, we may want to try to figure out if there's something we can do there. But probably the biggest consideration for the next retro is the fact that we're discussing moving to sub-department retros. So that was kind of just discussed this morning. So it's pretty hot news, but it seems like a good transition time for that, where we actually have potentially more meaningful discussions, but then go by sub-department. So Kenny's going to work on a proposal around that and may be implemented as soon as the beginning of next month. And then I put one in for Jerome and Kyle because it sounded like there might be some follow-up work around the specific community contribution because it sounds like it's quite large and the challenges associated with that. There's the two other action items from the last, or actually other three action items from the last update that I'll be following up on as well, just to see if we can get additional feedback there and any progress made there. Any other thoughts for this retro? All right. Thanks everybody for their time. Appreciate it. As always, everybody have